Hello, everyone. I did something weird yesterday, which was actually like reply and argue with a commentor who disagreed with me. Not something I'm going to make a habit of course. I mean, they were like respectful at least, so it was chill, but it was kind of about centralization as a concept. And that's something I want to talk about a little bit, because of course, something being over-centralizing is, well, an unlock being over-centralizing is oftentimes grounds or the explanation for it being banned. But there are plenty of things that are very centralizing in sixes. And I think that centralizing is not a moral term in the sense that it doesn't carry any weight about something being good or bad. It's merely a descriptor. And approaching it like that, it's easier to understand different examples of when something might be centralizing in a good way, centralizing in a bad way, or just centralizing in a completely neutral way, effectively. So, I think that a good place to start is just by talking about Ubers. How many times have I said that sentence at this point? So, as you all know, Ubers are the centralizing mechanic of sixes. I talk about this all the time. And it's a very positive thing overall. So, as far as, how Ubers are centralizing, Ubers are extremely centralizing. You are required to have a medic on your team 99% of the time, maybe a little lower depending on the team, maybe like 95, sometimes all the way down to like 90-80%, whatever. I'm being stupid. The vast majority of the time your medic will just be on stock Uber charge, and these things are relatively unchanging, especially having a medic to begin with. That is, like, at a baseline, completely mandatory. Uber is so centralizing of a mechanic that you will lose the game if you do not have a medic. And you're likely to lose the game if you're just at disad all the time and your med is nonstop caught to Ubers and whatnot. But that's not it. It's not just in class selection. It's also the fact that your positioning, your decision making, whether you're trying to hold a point, whether you're trying to push into the next point, whether you're trying to play passively and potentially concede a point you're on, all of these are mostly up to Ubers. There are some other factors at play usually, but Ubers and the state of Ubers are the big one, right? So, very, very centralizing. Almost everything about sixes revolves around Ubers. And I can provide an example as well. Let's imagine you're holding last. Now, we'll imagine process last. So, if it is Uber disad, meaning the other team has Uber or the other team has add and will get Uber before you get, then how you hold this point looks like your demo trapping the point, your demo playing very passive in heaven usually, your medic very passive in heaven usually, and heaven is that, area above the spawn, as well as usually you have a scout on heavy even in heaven as well. So you have the three of those classes, really passive in heaven. You have an engineer with a sentry gun built pretty near to the spawn, just so it can go up as fast as possible. You have your soldiers playing on doors so that teams can't just dry push through them. They actually have to use, and those soldiers will play to survive and play to stop the point, yada yada. And that's the general anatomy of a disad last hold on process. Well, if we switch no other factors, no other players are dead, no other players are on any other classes or anything like, well, they will incidentally be on other classes, but no other factors are changed except Ubers, and it's even Ubers now. The hold looks very different. You still have an engineer, and your sentry gun will be in a much more aggressive position, somewhere where it's actually like defendable, where it actually watches doors and things of that nature. Your demo is going to be much more aggressive. Your demo is going to actually be holding doors, usually in charge of like 3 and 4. Your soldiers are going to be much more aggressive and getting much more heal support. Your medic's going to be much more forward with the sentry gun. And your heavy probably won't be on heavy at all. They're likely going to be on like either sniper or scout even. or honestly, like Pyro on Process Last is not terrible. But you can see how nothing has changed except the state of Ubers, and the entire appearance of the hold has changed. And I can go a step further as well. If it's add, then you're likely, if you didn't already have the gun built, and in many cases, even if you do already have the gun built, your engineer is going to switch back off to scout, and you're going to have all just regular, no off classes pretty much as you attempt to push out. And no longer are you going to be holding these doors, you're going to be walking through them even. So Ubers are going to change completely how the game is played. And as you would expect, it's a very, very centralizing mechanic. So I talked earlier about how this is a good thing. Well, why is this a good thing? For starters, it serves as this kind of rock on which decision-making and strategy can root on. Because overall, well, it adds stability as well, I should say. Because there is something unchanging that you absolutely know beyond a reasonable doubt is the case. So you know if your medic dies and their medic lives, that it's disad. And you know that if it's disad, the other team has a timing window with which they have the ability to be invincible while you don't. And that's a very, very scary thing. So you have to play around that. It poses a problem, and it poses a situation that everyone's aware of, usually if you're tracking Ubers correctly, which isn't that hard. It's a situation that everyone's aware of, and it allows strategy to develop and flourish. It doesn't shoehorn in any one strategy or another, because, for example, if you want... So Uber disad, you obviously don't want your medic to usually be caught, but there are absolutely very, very aggressive disad strategies you can have, such as flank shoves. In some cases, entire combos can try and shove the flank and go behind during the other team's push when they're pushing with ad, and try and like back cap on 2 or something like that. Just like raise a lot of chaos and make the situation very uncomfortable for the other team. This is a totally viable strategy, which in and of itself has its own counterplay as well. But these strategies are only able to be developed and born out of the fact that Ubers, you only have one medic per team, and you're always going to have one medic per team. So you know that these Ubers are the way that they are. So while yes, it's maybe the most centralizing thing in the entire game, while yes, it could theoretically shoehorn you into having a medic no matter what, which, to be fair, like if medics were not class limit 1, then you would probably be running more of them. Like teams are definitely not, they'd be running medic no matter what, honestly. But still, could, maybe make the case that, being required to run a medic is shoehorning it into whatever. But overall, it provides a basis on which to develop more strategies rather than limit the amount of strategies that players can have. And for that reason, it's a very positive thing. Let us provide another example of an unlock this time that would be over-centralizing and centralizing in a negative way. And today, we're going to throw the Wrangler under the bus. So the Wrangler is actually a weapon that a lot of casual players complain about. In casual play, even. They think that it's kind of BS, kind of unfun to play against, kind of broken. And that's in an environment where there's far less coordination, but also far more people to shoot at sentry guns. But anyway, what would it look like? What would the Wrangler look like in a 6's environment? Well, the Wrangler is maybe one of the only unlocks that you could argue is, preventing a class from being run full time. This is an argument you see a lot of the time, is like, people don't like to see these classes, i.e. like engineer, pyro, sniper, heavy, spy. So you ban these weapons so that you don't see those classes, which really isn't the case. Like, with the exception of maybe the Wrangler and maybe, well, yeah, I don't know, like heavy to mid shenanigans you could make maybe an argument for, but the steak sandwich is unbanned in North America, and you don't see heavy to mid. So maybe the Wrangler's the only case where, like, yeah, maybe that could be the case where it prevents engineer from being run full time. Is that the reason it's banned? No. The reason it's banned is what I'm about to talk about. So what does engineer look like as or what does wrangler look like as a full-time option? Like what would a wrangler engineer to mid look like? What would wrangler engineer in like a stalemate or a push or something look like? Honestly, I have no idea. I couldn't tell you. And does that betray that this is banned for no reason? Absolutely not. Because I can tell you what the wrangler engineer would look like on last, and it is such a strategy cannibalizing, over-centralizing item that that in and of itself warrants the weapon from being disqualified from play. So, what does a disad last hold look like? I already talked about on process last kind of the positioning, but the actual how a push plays out is dependent on a couple factors. So what an Uber usually wants with their push is they want to take out the sentry gun. The sentry gun really only exists to waste time with the Uber in a disad situation. You don't want the Uber to be able to take so much space that they're able to like kill your soldiers, that they're able to get picks with which they can play a better post. You don't want these things to be happening. So you build a sentry gun that wastes their time, forces them to shoot at it. And on certain holds, on certain maps, you actually play a pyro near this sentry gun just to waste even more time by reflecting spam away from the gun. But the sentry gun exists to slow down this Uber. And depending on how well you defend this gun, because there are some cases where an engineer could even tank the gun if a demo is lazy about taking it out, then yeah, you can prevent an Uber from being able to cross or not. And an Uber's going to use in on a side of the last, and it's going to want to end on a side. Whether that's the side it uses in on, or the side, or they cross and end on the other side, is really up to how long the Uber took to do these things. And usually crossing is better, honestly. So teams like to cross with their Ubers, and a gun staying up longer definitely prevents this from happening. So stuff like gun pyro and engineers tanking the gun and whatnot can help prevent a cross, and that's usually a strong defensive strategy, right? That's pretty much how an Uber into last interacts with the sentry gun, right? Most of the time, it's really not that hard to take out as a demo, because a demo is going to be included into most Ubers into last, because it's a very powerful class, especially when you don't have to worry about his health in the case of an Uber charge. Usually it's just like a sticky in a pipe, especially if you're using the lock and load. A sticky in a pipe is very easy to take out the gun, and you oftentimes have enough ammo to cross. In the case of process, like a gun on right spawn, usually you just walk through 4 with your Uber, using it of course, take out the gun, and almost always have enough Uber to bomb across left and cross and then left side. It's very comfortable. Now, how do things change if you have the Wrangler? Well, some of you might be thinking, the Wrangler probably makes it so that Ubers just no longer can cross at all, right? And yes, that is certainly the case. But it's definitely more than that. It kind of makes it so the gun just can't be taken out at all, which is such a massive problem. Because the gun oftentimes is going to watch the point, meaning you can't cap the point without taking care of the gun. And the gun also just like controls so much space on an entire side of the last that it allows the other team to take so much positioning on that side of the last, where even if the gun didn't watch the point, it's so likely that those players with strong positionings are able to contest the point that you just have no hope of capping. How do you even approach a situation like this? I mean, traditionally into last, like you can play on like multiple, well, we'll get to that point later. So I think some of you might be thinking, okay, like competitive players just don't want to adapt. Like, yeah, I get that that's how the metagame is now, but it would change to adapt. So why don't you just let it change and adapt? And to that, I would say like let's look at how it would change and adapt, because the only thing that I can think of that like takes out a wrangled gun is, besides just immense amounts of focus fire, which if a team had the Wrangler, keep in mind they would absolutely play to abuse that weapon. You might see a gun pyro set up on process last, which is traditionally not really heard of. And good luck taking out the gun when even hard focus fire from all your classes, some of it's going to get reflected, and the gun is even more comfortable and even less likely to be taken out. So, yeah, just focus firing the gun is oftentimes not going to be enough in a case like that. Your Uber is going to end by the time that you can even deal enough damage to take out this gun, meaning it's probably going to kill your Uber as well. Just horrible, horrible things. I know, Focus the Engineer, again, you're not playing against, like, very casual players. You're playing against people who are trying to abuse these unlocks to win. If that Engineer dying means that they lose the gun and lose the hold, you better believe that Engineer's not going to be dying. That, like, they might even be playing in spawn if need be, just holding the thing out while a pyro reflects it, yada yada, because you just need the gun to survive. That's really the big thing. So how do you actually take this thing out? The only thing I can really think of, and I'm sure, like, there's going to be all sorts of, like, theory crafting comments you can leave. Again, like, I doesn't bother me. Honestly, like, sapping the gun is the big thing I can think of. Like, how else would you take this out? You only have one demo, 2 soldiers. And even then, good luck actually pressuring the gun if you have soldiers ready to bomb around and bomb doorways and try and counter spam as well, yada yada. So sapping the gun, having a spy and sapping the gun. Oh, well, isn't this, like, good class diversity? Didn't including the Wrangler suddenly make this... didn't this make the game more diverse and, more interesting metagame as a result? I don't think so at all. Because you're still not going to want to run a spy full time just because they can have a Wrangler on last. Absolutely not. And spy is such a weak class to be running, especially if you know that they have a spy. And yeah, I could only imagine a team trying to, like, spawn a spy when it's add into last and have them roll out so that they can sap the gun so you actually have a chance to win a round. Which is so ridiculous that you'd have to do that. And if we're talking in terms of, like, Uber percents, the amount of Uber add you need to have to pull off a strategy like that, in traditional, like, with the Wrangler band, for example, just the TF2 we play now, if you can push last off of even 20 add if you want, because you can do things, like, fast enough, and it's going to be much easier for the defense if Ubers are that slim, because... they can reliably get an Uber in the post. But if you play things really fast and aggressively, then it can totally work out. And you can play things differently depending on how much Uber you have. Versus if you have, like, 60 add, then you might be able to take space 5, for example, into process last. And actually get a lot of space into the last before even using if you'd like. And there's counterplay to this strategy with playing a sniper in the shutter, for example. In the spawn shutter, that is. And all sorts of things, like players actually bombing the doors. A demo might have 5 stickies on the point and 3 stickies elsewhere. That could be 5 if you're a team that You can see how much strategy there is developing around the state of Ubers, and all of that kind of gets thrown away and shoehorned in if there's a Wrangler sentry on last, because suddenly every single thing is going to revolve around the Wrangler in such a restrictive way, right? You are going to be confined to playing around very specific circumstances in a negative manner. And also, not even to mention, just reiterating again, if you're actually forced to, like, be playing a spy just to sap guns so that they can get spammed out because there's a Wrangler, that's, again, something that the other team can be aware of and can counterplay. Like, if you have to spawn a spy or already be running a spy into last just to deal with a wrangled gun, hey, guess what? The team running gun pyro knows that, right? So good luck even getting the sap. So you can understand how, yes, you can theory craft all these different ways to break some certain over-centralizing mechanic. And there's certainly, going to be theory crafted ways. I've presented a few that theoretically work in this case, but that's not enough, because it's not enough to be able to, like, break a Wrangler hold on last one time. You need to break a Wrangler hold on last at least, like, reliable enough to where things are balanced, right? Because balance is important in all aspects of the game, including the success rate of pushing last. You usually want pushing last with add to be something that's somewhat reliable, something that you can fail and the defenders can succeed, which is, again, rewarding for the defenders, but still. You want a certain level of reliability. But, oh man, did I just lose the point I was making? Right, so it's not enough that you have this, you can do it once, but you need it to have a certain level of reliability while also being a metagame staple, right? Because if this one strategy comes up as like kind of the go-to dominant strategy for countering the Wrangler on last, then guess what? All those teams defending last are going to come up with ways to make it difficult to counter, right? It's not just about you can theory craft the one-time solution. No, it needs to be an actual thing that is robust, like a robust plan, right? Because using in through 4, for example, against a no wrangle sentry gun, that's a very robust plan. Usually you use early enough that you don't have to worry about snipers peeking into lobby. You don't have to worry about traps on the doorway. And yes, if they have some type of gun pyro setup, which again is very rare on process because it's very easy for a demo to take out the gun traditionally, even with a pyro there. So people don't tend to run the pyro. They tend to run a heavy in heaven or a sniper in the spawn or something like that. Things like this. Let's actually hop into another demo here. Let us go with this guy, whatever it is. Yes, while teams are going to try to make it as difficult as possible for you to take out the gun and for you to get positioning and whatnot in this Uber. And the gun actually itself exists to slow you down. It's still balanced enough to where even if things go poorly, you're usually getting the gun and just forced to end on the right side, which is totally fine. Like if you're the defending team, you're fine if they can't cross. Like that's pretty comfortable. Your soldier on the other side is probably much more healthy. Stuff like this. It's pretty nice. And as the attackers, it's fine consolation. It is not so unbalanced such that every single thing revolves around trying to take out this impossible sentry gun just because it's being wrangled and has 3 times the health or whatever the actual numbers come out to be. Hopefully I'm illustrating well enough that even if you can kind of theory craft solutions around it, and even if you can kind of figure out, some theoretical counter, the idea that this metagame like will develop, strategies will develop in order to like include this weapon, in the case of like a centralized strategy, yes, that's the case where people are forced to develop strategies against it, and oftentimes forced, like shoehorned into strategies that are less optimal full time, such as running a spy of all classes, right? You're forced into these usually like suboptimal strategies rather than more robust ones. But also take into account the fact that the team using that over-centralized mechanic or over-centralized unlock, over-centralized whatever, are also just as capable of developing strategies, right? To make it even worse. So yeah, overall, there is centralization in good ways and centralization in bad ways. Now, I want to I rambled way longer there than I intended to because I wanted to kind of talk about the basic fundamentals early on. But how do you differentiate between the two? I think a decent enough rule of thumb is that healthy centralized strategies are usually those which are actually, provide, what's the word I'm looking for? They provide a solid foundation with which more is that even a word? I'm just going to ignore that. That allow more strategies to develop rather than shoehorning teams into very, very specific strategies in order to succeed, right? To play against disad and giving up a point, there are so many options. You can play a sniper or a spy. You can flank shove. You can just concede the space. You can pressure and send a sack. You have so many options and strategies, point by point, Uber by Uber. In some cases, you can try to slow them down with spam and maybe fade bombs in order to get an Uber of your own in exchange. You can see how there's so many strategies that arise out of something like this. And yet, Other strategies, that's certainly not the case, where you're very much shoehorned into like very limited options. Right. Are there other examples I can provide? Well, I think, well, one final thing, I suppose, is that, as far as what makes good and bad centralization, to some degree, fun is certainly going to take, is going to be considered, right? Because obviously you play the game to have fun, and usually things being balanced, things being interesting, there being good strategies being developed, and things like that are big factors in whether it's fun or not. But by and large, you want things to be fun. So even if you could make the case that a strategy isn't like centralizing, for example, like in Gen 3, there's a freeze clause, meaning you can only have one enemy Pokemon frozen at a time. Since there's no like actual reliable way to apply freezes, and it's also so unlikely. Like it doesn't really, that wasn't a centralizing force. It was kind of just like a 1 in 100 in a literal sense, a 1 in 100, just, oh wow, this super sucks for me type of thing. And it's also just not true to the cartridge as well. It's like modded in. And is this something that like makes the game more competitive? In a sense, yeah, it probably just removes RNG, can be nice. But that's definitely not, like, there's so many elements to RNG that are included. I think by and large, it's because of player fun. It just, no one likes getting double frozen, and people have more fun without it. And also, on top of that, it does, in some sense, introduce more strategy, because similar to how knowing only one Pokemon can be frozen at a time allows you to kind of sleep sack, meaning you can put a less valuable member of your team in that matchup to sleep, and you don't have to worry about sleep anymore. Likewise, you have that freeze sack, where if something gets frozen, you know that you can play as fast and loose against an Ice Beam as you want, because you'll never get frozen to it, etc. So player fun absolutely is going to be a consideration to some degree as well, over whether something centralizing is fun or not. And that is that leaves room for ambiguity as well, and leaves room for opinion. Because another example of centralization in sixes, and I know this is probably going on a long time, but still, there's a lot to talk about here. Another thing to talk about as far as centralization is concerned is that, or another example rather, is that of the class selection. 95% of the time, if you are not on the last point, maybe 95 again is a little high here, because you do see off classes get used. Pretty much every class gets used in most games, if not all. An engineer you're going to see every game. Sniper almost every game. Heavy almost every game, etc. But that's beside the point. You're going to be seeing the core combat classes of Demo, Scout, and Soldier, with, of course, the medic who never switches off. Demo never really switches off for that matter. You're going to see these classes almost all the time. It's very centralizing. These are kind of the classes in which you're expected to play as well. So is this the kind of strategy or kind of centralization that restricts options? Are you no longer allowed to play Sniper and Pyro and Spy because you are restricted into these classes because they're so centralizing? And this is me genuinely like pondering that question right now. I think you definitely can make the argument. However, I think that the core reason that, well, for starters, these classes are just good, right? They are just generally useful, especially in 5CP and Koth, which are played in sixes. They're just generally helpful. There are going to be so many times in which you just do not want to have a Spy, or a Spy is a complete liability, or you do not want to have a Sniper, or you do not want to have a Pyro or a Heavy, or etc. There are almost no times in which you just straight up do not want to have a Soldier on your team. It is just almost always a useful class, and the times where your Soldier switches off, it's with full awareness that, you know, you are giving up a lot here, and you need to play delicately around that fact, right? So, Likewise, you will always want to have a demo. You will always want to have a medic. Scout, you're almost always going to be happy to have a scout, except for like on last, which they're usually the first class to switch off. Not so strong defensively necessarily. So yeah, these classes are just fundamentally strong. So to some extent, yeah, you are. If you're trying to win, then you're going to be shoehorned into using the strongest options. That being said, though, where these off classes actually thrive as far as, strategies that involve sniper, strategies that involve spy and whatnot, do flourish out of the fact that there's these certain expected classes. For example, a sap and sack play into last, where you abuse very forward positioning of an enemy medic, protected only by their sentry gun. You abuse that fact by sapping the gun and sacking in your soldier. This play works because you have a spy and a soldier, which you're expected to have almost all the time. Because of that, centralized class being there, suddenly this spy strategy is able to develop. Likewise, a pyro gun strategy that I was talking about earlier, very, very powerful defensive strategy. You see it all the time on like Metalworks and Gully Wash. This is a strategy that really only exists because there is a good expectation that the other team is going to be Ubering in with their demo and they're going to have soldiers and whatnot. So this is a strategy that is able to develop and flourish only out of the fact that you expect Ubers to be taken in this certain way because they have these certain classes. What are some other examples I can think of? I'm trying to think. Sniper, for example. When you're playing a sniper into like second rather than last, you can play pretty confidently knowing the other team doesn't have a counter sniper, and you might not really need your sniper to be that buffed to begin with. They can, take peeks in such a way that they know they can't really get counter sniped, as well as like they're not getting backstabbed, obviously. So, you can hard scope to your heart's content, so long as, you're not just tunnel visioned and dying to players in your peripheral vision that you can't see anymore, yada yada. But you can play with a reasonable expectation that there's not a sniper on the other team or not a spy on the other team or whatever classes, because these centralizing classes are played most of the time. So while yes, there's certain ways in which these classes being so strong in such general purposes does kind of shoehorn you into playing them, that is certainly true. On the flip side, there are also so many strategies involving other classes that only exist and can only thrive because of this very centralized core of classes that you see most of the time, right? So maybe, and again, this is largely opinion, but maybe the class selection is an example of more neutral centralization, where it's inarguably centralized and centralizing, but it provides some strategies while also restricting others, right? And that being said, like full-time off classes are totally something you can do and strategize around and try and develop. Like no one's going to be banning you or stopping you from playing as a result. It's just some people won't want to play against the full-time pyro or whatnot. But anyway, I think that's a decent place to wrap up kind of the discussion about centralized mechanics and what over-centralizing things might look like. Overall, centralization can be a very positive force where it allows a solid foundation with which strategy can develop around in the case of something like Ubers and a medic class limit of 1. In other cases, it might be very negative and limit a wide variety of strategies and kind of shoehorn players and teams into only one strategy in the case of like a Wrangler Sentry on last. But in some cases, it does a little bit of both. Definitely restricts you to play in a certain way, but because you're playing in that certain way, suddenly more strategies can exist as a result in the case of kind of just the class lineup meta, I guess. So anyway, I think that's all I have to talk about. It's probably turned out to be a long one, so I'm sure some people are fast asleep. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all next time.